All praises to Yahweh Ba'ashem, Yahushai, double honors to the elders and the apostles of Great Millstone who rule and teach well, who taught us his truth. This is your brother Yashimai from the GMS Atlanta camp. And today's video is going to be going into Daniel, the 11th chapter. And I'm going to cover verses 1 until 8 or 9-ish. Now, Daniel, the 11th chapter, it consists of about 40-something verses, and it's nothing but history, but it's very important history for us to be able to understand. Now, this is going to be an overview as has been taught to us by our elders and apostles from GMS on down. Okay, so hopefully this is edifying. Let's go ahead and get straight into it. It says, also I, in the first year of Darius the Mede, even I stood to confirm and to strengthen him. So this is Daniel getting the vision during the year of 539 BC, 539 BC, during the time that Darius was the ruler of the Persian Empire. Okay, now, one thing about Darius was the king that went into the records and confirmed the edict that Cyrus the Great had given of allowing the southern kingdom, the so-called blacks, to leave Babylon and go back to Jerusalem to rebuild the capital and the walls. Now, brothers can read about this in Ezra, the 6th chapter. Okay, so now let's continue down. Verse 2 says, and now will I show thee the truth. Behold, there shall stand up yet 3 kings in Persia, and the 4th shall be far richer than they all. And by his strength, through his riches, he shall stir up all against the realm of Grecia. So now let's go back and get the understanding here. So Daniel gets the vision about 4 kings, within the Persian Empire. Now, just to give you the short answer, that 4th king is Xerxes. Okay, somebody may be reading the scriptures and say, well, hold on, Darius, and then after Darius comes Xerxes, so how could that be the 4th one? The way that Daniel was given this vision, the Most High started counting from the beginning of the Persian Empire. So the first king was Cyrus, the second king was Cambyses, and then the 3rd king is Darius, and then the 4th one is his son Xerxes. Okay, it says, behold, there shall stand up yet 3 kings in Persia, and the 4th shall be far richer than they all. Right? And so during the time of Xerxes' reign, this was when the Persian Empire was its richest, and this was when, matter of fact, we'll go ahead and go straight into it, because when you're a king, what would be riches to a king other than the obvious? The obvious being the financial aspect. But what else would make a king rich, per se? What makes a president of a country rich? His economy and his military. So Xerxes was rich in the form of his military. And it goes on, it says, and by his strength, through his riches, he shall stir up all against the realm of Grecia. Okay, so this is where it talks about stirring up against the realm of Grecia. This is Xerxes, fighting back and forth with the Greeks, which, we know to be Edomites. And when the scriptures talk about stirring up his heart against the realm of Grecia, it's talking about the Greco-Persian Wars. And what the Greco-Persian Wars, I'll give a brief summary, but, brothers are welcome to go in and do your own diligent search. Okay, so but the Greco-Persian Wars is after the taking of this city here, Ionia, the Persians had set up tyrants, basically satraps. Well, what is a satrap? A satrap is a governor, and this term came of age during the Persian Empire, and the term satrap was even used during the Greek Empire. Okay, so but what ended up happening basically is you got the Persians that took over Ionia, which was a Greek city. They set up satraps, which were tyrannical in the way that they would rule the Grecians, and the Grecians began to fight against the Persians. Okay, now these wars lasted about 50 years, from 499 to 449 BC, and Xerxes himself, matter of fact, Xerxes himself, he was the one that led one of the battles here, right here. In 480 BC, Xerxes personally led the second Persian invasion of Greece with one of the largest ancient armies ever assembled. And that lines up with that part of the precept here where it says, and by his strength through his riches he shall stir up all against the realm. By his strength, and his strength goes into, at that time, it was one of the largest ancient armies ever assembled, as we can read here. So basically, this was the beginning of the back and forth between the Grecians and the Persians. Now, at this time, the Grecians weren't completely set up. They were there was a bunch of independent Greek cities, and they would try to coalesce with each other by setting up what's called leagues. And it wasn't until Philip II, which is the father of Alexander the Greek, he was the one who got all of got the majority of the Grecian states to come together. I forget the name of that league. Brothers can look it up here. But basically, the second verse goes into the Greco-Persian Wars, and what ended up happening is it was a war back and forth where Greece would take some of the land. Greece would kick the Persians out, and then the Persians would come back, and then ultimately they ended up creating what's called the peace of Cialis. Matter of fact, is meant right here. Peace of the peace of Salakia, the peace of Salius, and so basically this put a stop to the fighting. Okay, but we know as prophecy goes, ultimately the fighting would start again, and the Greeks would overtake the Persians, okay, which the scripture is going to get into that. Verse 3 says, and a mighty king shall stand up, that shall rule with great dominion, and do according to his will. So who is that mighty king? That mighty king here is Alexander the Greek. He was the one that would ultimately begin the war against the Persians. And brothers know the history that, his father, Philip II, the Macedonian, wanted to begin to fight against the Persians, but he ends up dying prior. Okay, it says, and a mighty king shall stand up. This is Alexander, the Greek, that shall rule with great dominion and do according to his will. And this is the same Daniel that we see over here in Daniel 7 and 6. Okay, this is Daniel 7 verse 6. It says, after this I beheld, and lo, another like a leopard, which had on the back of it 4 wings of a fowl. The beast had also 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. So this is the Grecian Empire that Daniel saw. This was the third beast. And, it was likened unto a leopard because Alexander took over the entire known world at the time in a very short span of time. Hence the leopard. I believe it was 11 years that it took him to take over the known world. And then furthermore it says, which had upon the back of it 4 wings of a fowl. The beast had also 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. Okay, and so we understand that these 4 wings are the 4 generals that ended up dividing up the land of Alexander. Okay, and we're going to get those 4 generals because they are also mentioned here in verse 4. So it says, and when he shall stand up, his kingdom shall be broken, and shall be divided toward the four winds of heaven. And here again we have four, because again it's lining up with Daniel 7 verse 6, which again proves that the word of Yahweh Ba'Shem Yahweh Shai is perfect. Everything lines up. It says toward the four winds of heaven. Now what? And not to his posterity, nor according to his dominion which he ruled, for his kingdom shall be plucked up, even for others besides those. Okay, so now a couple things to get here. We mentioned the four winds. I'm going to bring up this map here, and I'm going to bring this map up here because, we know who those four generals are. They are Ptolemy, Seleucus, Cassander, and Lacemaeus. But there was all prior to them, divvying up the land. There was also another one called Antagonist. Okay, which we're gonna get the history on that. All right, but just to get the understanding here, when the scripture talks about the four winds of heaven, that's talking about those four generals: Ptolemy, Cassander, Lacemaeus, and Seleucus. All right, so that's how his kingdom was divided ultimately into four. Which, matter of fact, we can go ahead and show that. Let me go back here. But I am going to come back to that map. And this is how the land was divvied up right here. Okay. So you got the Seleucid Empire here to the north of the Ptolemaic Empire. And then you got Cassander and Lacemaeus here at the top. All right. So now let's go back here, because we're going to come back to that first map. Matter of fact, I'll just go back to it now so I don't lose it. Let's go back to the scriptures, and then we'll come back to that map. It says, and shall be divided to the four winds, and not to his posterity. And when you go into that word, when you go into the blue letter for the word posterity, as we have been taught by our elders, the word posterity here is achrayath in the Hebrew. And that word just goes into his remnant. So when the scripture talks about not to his posterity, his kingdom was not the kingdom of Alexander wasn't passed on to his seed. Alexander did have a son, but his son got so they took out his son, right? So that his generals could commandeer power. So it says, nor according to his dominion which he ruled. Now let's go back to that map, because when Alexander was alive, he took over all of the known world. So all of this was the Grecian Empire. And so what ends up happening is, after he dies, the Grecian Empire gets broken up, first to fifths, and then ultimately to fourths. Okay, so when the scripture talks about nor according to his dominion which he ruled, it wasn't in one solid kingdom. It got broken up. So it says, for his kingdom shall be plucked up, even for others besides those. Okay, so his kingdom being plucked up, again, as I mentioned earlier, his son was taken out, and his seed line was ended. All right, so now, before we go into the fifth verse, because this is going to be going into the Syrian wars, all right? And like I said, we'll go from the fifth, probably down to the ninth verse here, because these verses cover the first three Syrian wars. Now, there was a total of 6 Syrian wars. This video is going to cover the first 3 for the sake of time. So now let's go into the history of the Syrian wars. What caused the Syrian wars? Okay, well, so after the death of Alexander, you had antagonists. Well, let me take it back. After the death of Alexander, you had a general by the name of Perdiccas, who was set up as a regent, R-E-G-E-N-T. What is a regent? A regent basically means the king, the ruler. Okay, so Perdiccas was set up as a regent, and Antagonist was set up as the second in command. Well, Perdiccas ends up getting killed. All right, and Antagonist becomes regent. And so, one thing about Antagonist is he tries to bring the Grecian kingdom under one empire. All right, because now at this time, as you can see, you got Antagonist here, you got Seleucus here, and Ptolemy here. So he tries to bring them together, and that doesn't end up happening. Well, what ends up happening is the four generals here together conspire against Antagonists, and they take Antagonists out. Okay? Prior to taking Antagonists out, Ptolemy, right? Ptolemy the first Soter, Ptolemy has helped Seleucus the first in, basically setting up his kingdom. Okay? Seleucus, had the help of Ptolemy while he was, carving out his land. Okay? That's important history. All right. So, anyways, they take out antagonists, and when they take out antagonists, they divvy up the land between the four generals. This is what's this strip of land right here. Over here to the west of Africa, which includes Israel, the Holy Land, and then it comes up here into a mountain range. The Fertile Crescent. This is what caused the Syrian wars. Okay, and brothers are welcome to do their own search here, but basically, the the reason that patch is called Kol Syria, and that word Kol Syria comes from the Hebrew call. Okay, because it basically means all of Syria. So check this out. This is what causes the Syrian wars. Okay, so now let's go back to the history. When Antagonist gets taken out, they divvy up the land. Okay, so now let's go from here. Let's go back to that first map. And originally, when they divvy up the land, when the four generals divvy up the land, this part here, Kol Syria, is supposed to go to the Seleucid Empire. But prior to this part going, prior to Antagonist being taken out, though, I forgot to mention, prior to Antagonist being taken out, Ptolemy, was already down here in the south, and Ptolemy had set up, in Kol Syria. He would set up and then he'd leave. He would set up and then he'd leave. And so he did this about 2 or 3 times. So Ptolemy had built up a history there. Fast forward to when Antagonist gets taken out, that this part of the land is supposed to go to the Seleucid Empire. It goes to the Seleucid Empire, but Ptolemy the first Soter, he begins to, again, he goes back to Kol Syria because he's done so in the past, and then he basically takes, he takes it over. So Seleucus, he hears about it, but he doesn't do anything. Why? Because he doesn't do anything because he remembers that Ptolemy helped set him up. So everything is fine, Ptolemy the first Soter and Seleucus the first, everything's good with them. Ptolemy has that land, and then what starts the Syrian wars? Well, first and foremost is prophecy, but what starts it in the minds of these generals is this little patch of land. All right, because now the Ptolemy the first and Seleucus the first, they die, and then the sons of these kings begin to fight back and forth for this part of Syria here, for Kol Syria. So that's the background of what's caused the Syrian wars. Okay, so now that we have that understanding, for us continuing, let's also establish too that the Seleucid Empire, because as we are going to read in Daniel the 11th chapter, we're going to read about the king of the north and the king of the south. And as you can see in this geographical map, the king of the north is going to be referencing the Seleucid Empire. The king of the south right here is going to be referencing the Ptolemaic Empire, or the Ptolemaic kingdom, or the Ptolemaic dynasty, whichever you want to use. So now let's go ahead and get back into the scriptures. So this is the first Syrian war, and matter of fact, I'll go ahead and pull it up right here. And like I said, brothers can read about it. So basically, the first Syrian war. Let's get the scriptures. Says it says, "And the king of the south shall be strong, and one of his princes, and he shall be strong above him and have dominion. His dominion shall be a great dominion. Okay, so now let's get the understanding here. So when it talks about the king of the south shall be strong, this is Ptolemy Soter. This is after the breaking up of the land. It should be noted that out of the four generals, prior to Antagonist being taken out, Ptolemy the First Soter was the main king that Perdiccas, the temporary regent, had been scared of. So of all the generals, Perdiccas actually started going to war against Ptolemy the First Soter. Okay, and then furthermore, when it talks about he shall be strong, Ptolemy the First Soter would go on to steal the dead body of Alexander the Great after he died. Alexander the Greek after he died, and he would take his body to Memphis. And when he did this, he won the hearts of the what's the word that I'm looking for, of the Egyptians. Okay, um, and so it says, and one of his princes. Now, one of his princes, um, the prince that would be strong. This is talking about his son, about the son. It's talking about the son of Ptolemy the First Soter, whose name would be Ptolemy the Second Philadelphus. Okay, and when the scriptures say that his prince shall be strong, Ptolemy the Second, whose surname is Philadelphus, Ptolemy the Second was the one that basically concreted the dynasty that his father laid. All right, Ptolemy the Second Philadelphus was very he was very smart when it came to administration. He began to develop his kingdom's economy. He began to set forth laws. I believe he did the library in Alexandria, if I'm not mistaken. But basically, he after his father set up after his father set up the kingdom, he basically set it in stone, and so he created what's known as the Golden Age for the Ptolemaic kingdom. So when it talks about one of his princes being strong, it's talking about Ptolemy the Second Philadelphus, because he did the Golden Age. All right. Furthermore, it says, and he shall be strong above him. Now, who's the one that shall be strong above him? The king to the north. The king to the north being the Seleucid Empire, okay? Because the Seleucid Empire, as we saw in the map, let's go back to this map. The Seleucid Empire would have the most territory of them all, as you can clearly see here. All right, let's go back to the scriptures here. And he shall be strong above him and have dominion. His dominion shall be a great dominion, as we just saw. All right, so we can even, the fifth verse, goes into the first Syrian war, and that's when Antiochus, the first, matter of fact, I got the kings pulled up here, right? Yeah. Antiochus the first, come. So on the left here, y'all can see the kings of the Ptolemaic Empire and the kings of the Seleucid Empire. Okay, starting from the top, these are the forefathers of their kingdom. The first Syrian war was Ptolemy II, Philadelphus against Antiochus I. Okay, and so when in the fifth verse, when it talks about the king of the south shall be strong, Antiochus, as you can read here in the Syrian wars, the first Syrian war, Antiochus I went against Ptolemy II, and Ptolemy II was able to. At first, he lost some territory, but then he came back and got those territories in 271 BC. So during the first Syrian war, it was a back and forth. So when the scriptures talk about the south shall be strong, that's talking about him, talking about the second king, Ptolemy, Philadelphus, keeping the armies back, from the army of the north, being the Seleucid Empire. All right, so now let's go down to verse 6, because verse 6 goes into the second Syrian war. Okay, so let's go ahead and see what the scriptures say. It says, and in the end of years, they shall join themselves together. Now, okay, so they shall join themselves together. What does that mean? To stop the going back and forth, what ended up happening is Antiochus would take matter of fact, let's just continue reading. It says, "For the king's daughter of the south shall come to the king of the north to make an agreement." All right, but she shall not retain the power of the arm. Okay, so now let's go ahead and get the understanding. As they were going back and forth, Ptolemy the second would give his daughter to marry Antiochus the second. Okay, at this time now we're here. Hold on a minute. Now we're Ptolemy the second. All right, Antiochus the first has died, so Ptolemy the second against Antiochus the second. Okay, which his name is Antiochus the second Theos. Okay, Antiochus the second Theos. And so as they're going back and forth, they reach a truce by Ptolemy giving his daughter to Antiochus the second Theos. Okay, which brothers can read about this too. Bernice, yeah, there you go, Bernice, Syria. There you go, Bernice, Syria, right here. So here's the history. Basically, it goes into Ptolemy the second being sent to Antiochus the second Theos, and so Ptolemy Philadelphus, when he gave his daughter to Antiochus the second Theos, it was in the form of a peace treaty, but he was also trying to basically put his bloodline into his enemy's kingdom. He was trying to usurp the throne, right? So that's what the scriptures talk about. It says, "For the king's daughter of the south," that's Ptolemy the second, "shall come to the king of the north." Okay, that's Antiochus the second Theos, to make an agreement, but she shall not retain the power of the arm. Okay, because as mentioned earlier, this wasn't just done as a peace treaty, but it was done to usurp the throne. But the scripture says that she, being Bernice, should not retain the power. Neither shall he stand, nor his arm, but she shall be given up, and they that brought her, and he that begat her, and he that strengthened her in these times. Okay, so now, just to give some backstory, what ends up happening is when Antiochus II Theos is given Bernice as a wife. At the time, he's already married to his wife Laodice. Oh yeah, Laodice. Okay, so what Antiochus II Theos does is he basically puts away his first wife, and he takes on Bernice. Okay, and then so they have kids. All right, so now Antiochus II Theos has a kid with his first wife, which is Laodice, and then he has a kid with Bernice. Okay, and so what ends up happening is Antiochus II Theos, he gets back with his first wife, and there begins a power struggle. All right, let's go on here because that power struggle continues on. Matter of fact, it says, "But she shall be given up." Okay, so during that power struggle, what ends up happening is, what's the power struggle for? The power struggle is because Bernice wants her son to be king, Laodice wants her son to be king. So what ends up happening is Bernice gets imprisoned, and while Bernice is imprisoned, she sends a letter to the new king of the Ptolemaic Empire, which is Ptolemy the Third Euergetes. Okay, and so Ptolemy the Third Euergetes, he ends up going up north to the Seleucid Empire, and when he gets there, he finds that Bernice is dead, and so is the son. Okay, so when the scripture talks about "but she shall be given up," it's talking about her being killed. And he that begat her, and he that strengthened her in her times. Also, he that begat her, I shall I should also mention that Antiochus the second Theos, he ends up getting poisoned by his wife, Laodice, yeah. So yeah, so after Slakia, after Antiochus II gets poisoned by his first wife, that's when the power struggle happens, okay? Because now Antiochus the second Theos is dead, and they're going back and forth. All right, so now let's go on to verse 7. It says, "But out of a branch of her roots shall one stand up in his estate." Okay, so verse 7, this is talking about when Ptolemy the third, Euergetes, he gets the letter from Bernice while she's locked up, and then he stands up, and then, he goes up north to the Seleucid Empire to, quotation marks, quell things down, if you will. But, really he's going up there to try to, again, usurp the throne, right? To, set up his, so-called bloodline, because these people go by, these Edomites, thought that the bloodline continues through the mom, which, I mean, we know that that doesn't line up according to Numbers 1 verse 14, but that's how these Edomites thought. They thought the daughter had a baby, so that's their bloodline. No, you know, basis of men. But let's continue on. It says, "Which shall come with an army," and so that's going in. Now we're in the third Syrian war, and we'll go ahead and go back here. We're now in the third Syrian war, also known as the Laodicean War. Okay, this is when, um, as I'm stating, this is when Ptolemy the third goes up to the north to try to establish the rulership. So it says, "Which shall come with an army and shall enter into the fortress of the king of the north." Again, that's the Seleucid Empire, "and shall deal against them and shall prevail." And so what ends up happening is when Ptolemy the third Euergetes goes up there, he finds that Bernice is dead, and so what he ends up doing is he ends up killing um, Laidos, okay, and he actually ends up taking land. Um, I believe during this time, this is when um, he began to somewhat establish himself in Kol Syria. All right. Let's continue on in verse 8. It says, verse 8 right here. Okay, yeah, it says, verse 8 says, "And shall also carry captives into Egypt their gods." So again, when Ptolemy the third, Euergetes comes, he basically, goes in there kicking asses and taking names, and, he would take back captives back into Egypt. Um, it says, "Shall also carry captives into Egypt their gods, with the princes and with precious vessels of silver and gold." Now, this is something that's, beautiful about the scriptures here, because when we go into his name, Ptolemy the third, Euergetes, he actually got his name based upon what prophecy said would happen. Hone in on this, and with their precious vessels of silver and gold, and carry captives into Egypt their gods. So, carry captives into Egypt their gods. When Ptolemy the third, Euergetes, went into the Seleucid kingdom, he got previous images, and matter of fact, let's see, how did Ptolemy the third get the name Euergetes? The word Euergetes means benefactor. Okay, it says right here, "He returned Egyptian idols and sacred treasures that had been taken to the Seleucid Empire in the east." Ain't that crazy? His name, Euergetes, means benefactor, gods. Why? Because the scripture said, foretold, says, "And shall also carry captives into Egypt their gods with precious vessels of silver and gold. And he shall continue more years than the king of the north." Okay, verse 9. It says, so, verse 9 says, "So the king of the south," that's Ptolemy the third, Euergetes still. It says, "So the king of the south shall come into his kingdom and shall return into his own land." And so what that's going into is him go. It's pretty self-explanatory, but basically the Seleucid Empire ended up paying him 1,500 talents to leave. And on his way out, he looted their temples, and he got the Egyptians their gods. And so when he went back to Egypt, he presented the Egyptians their gods, and that's how he got his name. It says, and shall continue and shall return into his own land. And it should be noted too that when he rushed the Seleucid kingdom during the Third Syrian War, um, he actually got as far as Babylon, and he actually overtook the city of Antioch, which was a major hub for the Seleucid Empire. Let me see if I think that's pretty much it. I'm gonna go ahead and stop it there on the first three Syrian wars, and the next videos we'll go into the fourth, the fourth through six, and but yeah, I mean, brothers, do your own research. This is just an overview for us to get the general understanding of the history. But the scripture says to be occupied in prophecy and to give ourselves unto the scripture. The Romans 12 says to offer our body as a living sacrifice, man. And these scriptures are our heritage, man. So this is what we're here to do. But go ahead and do your own research, and I'll catch you guys on the next one. Shalom.